Every iPhone comes packed with a ton of professional features. You've probably seen them in Apple's keynotes and influencers talking about them, but when do you actually need to use them? Specifically, we're going to be talking about ProRes and ProRAW. And my friend David Altizer is back once again, so we can dig into this.
Hello. Yes, I'm very excited to talk about this because for so many years, the term still looks like an iPhone was going around when Apple would release footage from new phones. But I'd say over the last, 3-4 years or so, with the introduction of Apple Log and ProRAW, which did exist for a while, we've started to see that kind of veneer of that overprocessed HDR, over-sharp look kind of go away. And it's really fascinating to learn kind of why that is. And then also, I am really curious to hear your thoughts on all this because you're really at the forefront of the Apple Log and LUTs and all that kind of stuff. So let's just start there. Like, when did you see this shift from it looks like an iPhone or it looks like a mobile phone to, wow, this actually looks like a real camera?
Well, as you might have noticed in my reviews, things did gradually keep getting better. You know, as we got 4K and as they refined some of the algorithms, like things looked more natural and gradually we're looking better on iPhones. But there was this huge jump, this like pivotal moment at the iPhone 15 Pro when they introduced Apple Log. And that completely changed my approach to my iPhone as a professional tool. It meant that we could use it for client shoots. It meant that we had all this extra flexibility, and we'll get into when that's actually useful and not. But that was really the moment that things completely changed. And before that, we did have Apple ProRAW, which is the photo RAW format, and we'll be talking about both photo and video production in this video in this conversation today. But I think that's when it really jumped out at me because I think the iPhone's also had a bigger impact on video production than it has photo production, even though it's got much better at both.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously, I will say from a consumer perspective, it's had a revolutionary shift in photo production because I'm a dad, as you can tell by my hat. That's all you need, by the way, to be a dad is to wear a dad hat. But as a father, I go to these, events with my son who's maybe doing like some sort of Christmas program or, my son's in soccer. And so I go to the soccer games. I never see a parent with a real camera anymore. They are all filming their children's live performances, their children's soccer games, always on iPhones, and they're usually zooming in to 30x, and they hold it vertically. It drives me crazy. I'm like, you realize your kid is only this age one time. He or she is only doing this thing one time. Why are you not treating this a little bit more like it's important and use a real camera? Yeah. Like I switched over to an RX 100. I bought an RX 100 Mark 7 just for this reason. It's got a 200x optical zoom and, phase detect sensor, a 1-inch sensor, and it does look better than my phone for that use case. But
I think there's always a giveaway of people that aren't great at photo or video when you see them pinching to zoom. I mean, it's a small thing. I'm sure they don't realize why I would say that. But for people that care about being like precision with their iPhone photo and videos, seeing that instantly flags like, oh, they're not actually too worried how this turns out.
Although I will be the first to admit that I have done that myself. It is convenient, but
moments.
But when you see somebody
weakness,
when you see somebody filming horizontally and then they're tapping the actual button to zoom in, then okay, at least they're zooming in properly. But I noticed, especially with the iPhone 15 Pro, and I would even argue that even to this day, as good as the 17 Pro is as we're recording this, I still think arguably the 15 Pro is as good, for video with ProLog and all that. The advancements are a little bit more software based because I don't think the hardware has changed since the iPhone 14, actually. It's the same camera and sensor in the 17 that was in the 14 Pro, actually.
We'll have some thoughts about that. Let's circle back around. We've got some notes here. We'll hit it at the end. I do have some thoughts, but when do you actually make these changes? Like starting off with, let's say, ProRes and Apple Log. Those are the professional ways of getting the Hollywood-looking video out of your camera. Do you find yourself switching to them when you're recording your kid's soccer game, or are you using just the default video mode?
So I personally am a camera nerd, so I use a real dedicated camera. Like I said, the RX 107, or I have an OM3 from OM Systems. That's kind of my like fun camera. You could fill in the blank with like a Leica Q or like a Fuji X100 type of thing. Like I love having real cameras. So I am the weird dad who shows up with, a boom mic with like the wind muff on it to make sure that the wind from the soccer game doesn't ruin my footage on my RX 107. I am the exception. Okay. So maybe some of you people out there are that way, but the problem with ProLog or Apple Log with ProRes, is the fact that it's ProRes built into iPhone. That ProRes file, though it's amazing, is just massive. And for everyday filming as like a dad or like just whatever, you don't want the file sizes that thing creates. So it wasn't until the Blackmagic camera app came out that gave us the ability to shoot HEVC or H.265, which is a much more compressed file format. That's when I started using Apple Log much more regularly. And I think, honestly, for almost everybody, other than maybe if you're on a film set, that should be the default way to film Apple Log. And the fact that Apple themselves is not even giving an option to do that in camera with their built-in camera app is still kind of strange to me. I wonder if that's a licensing thing, maybe. I don't know how it all works. Apple obviously owns the ProRes licensing, but it is interesting that they only give this really massive ProRes encoder on the iPhones right now because the file sizes are insane.
That's something I want to get into right away because I see this misconception all the time. I try to address it in all my tutorials about how to shoot video on your iPhone, but I want to hit it again, is that the important differences that you see are coming from Apple Log, not from ProRes. And those are just two completely different things. Like they actually don't have anything to do with each other. If you remember, ProRes was launched quite a while before. I don't remember if it was the iPhone 13 or 14 Pro, but it came out a long time before Apple Log did. And it wasn't a revolution. It didn't make a big difference because basically we just got these larger file sizes because ProRes is a codec and a container. So it's both those are two different things, but for people that aren't going to dig into the details here, it just means that you are compressing the image less. So whatever colors are in there, whatever visuals you've got, they're not going to change in the future, but it's a larger file. So if you manipulate it later, there's a little more flexibility. Apple Log is the magic. That's where Apple went back to the ground zero for their color science, scraped away a lot of the sharpening, the HDR, and gave you a flat image that uses standardized color science so you can apply something like a LUT afterwards, or just use an app. There's many apps that'll just do this for you without learning any color grading. And you'll suddenly get back to a neutral looking image, except it doesn't have all that additional processing. So there really I just need to keep emphasizing over and over that like people need to separate these two things in their mind. Apple Log is a color profile and ProRes is a codec and file container, and you don't need one or the other. And like you said, what we really need is Apple to fully support a more compressed file format natively inside the camera, like H.265, HEVC.
While shooting log, because HEVC is in the camera already, just with the standard profile applied. So they are able to do HEVC, which is the more compressed file format, but only with the standard profile. So I don't understand why there's that disconnect there. The other thing that's important to note is, this is a very technical thing, but I think we can simplify it down, is the dynamic tone mapping was the issue that plagued iPhones forever. Even before ProRes was happening, we were shooting on an app called Filmic Pro that gave us a lot of pro features on iPhones, like even the iPhone 7, honestly. And they even tried their best to do these log formats themselves, and it got pretty close. Steven Soderbergh actually filmed multiple films on iPhones before the Apple Log thing even happened. He shot on Filmic Pro with their log formats on, I think, the iPhone 7 Plus back in the day. The problem with those cameras and with those phones is Apple had this thing called dynamic tone mapping, which I'm sure you remember, Tyler, what would happen is even with all these pro features enabled, even with all the exposure settings locked, you would still see things kind of flickering in the background, because what the camera was wanting to do was to do this kind of HDR blend with the exposure in the background. And it was this constant flicker that would come in and out, and you could not control it. You couldn't stop it. And even with ProRes on the iPhone 13 Pro, they didn't disable that. It wasn't until the 15 Pro with Apple Log that not only did we remove all that over sharpening, over processing, we got the flat image that gave us much more room for dynamic range control, but we finally got rid of the dynamic tone mapping that had plagued the phones for years. And so now we get a true, like, just straight out of camera shot that you would get on any other camera, like a Sony A7S or whatever. So it was really a revolution when they finally got rid of the dynamic tone mapping.
Well, and I'll just say those movies don't visually hold up all that well. Like I don't think we'll be looking back at those as like when phones arrived as real cameras, because it didn't look great. It didn't look great at the time either. And I just wanted a little bit of defense of like the negative spin on dynamic tone mapping. Like I get it, because it's, as a professional creators like us, of course we care and want a more neutral look. But I do understand why the default has this aggressive tone mapping. I mean, this is still just kind of the default that you'll get. There'll be a lot of like lifting of shadows and stuff. And I do think that gets average people just want to see what's in the image, and it gets them closer to that instantly. So,
yeah,
I understand why it's the default. If the default was full contrast, I think they would be like, why can't I see deep into the shadows on my image? Like, I don't know. They just want it to be taken care of for them.
But I was just saying, while using Filmic Pro, while using ProRes, which you're intentionally diving into the pro features, you're wanting to, as a professional, the difference between a professional and an amateur, in my opinion, is taking control of the image, being able to actually have control of what you're doing. I mean, that's even the difference between like AI generation and building something in After Effects. Like, can AI create motion graphics? Yes, but I don't have much control over what it does. But if I build it in After Effects, I'm controlling the keyframes, I'm controlling every aspect of it. So by not having control, even when you're trying to control everything else, that was the problem with dynamic tone mapping. Now we finally have control. And in fact, 28 days later, or was it 28 years later, was a film that was the first kind of real Hollywood production shot on. It was shot on the iPhone 15 Pro in ProRes and Log, and that film definitely holds up much better.
And there's also a lot of shots in F1 as well that were using the prototypes for the iPhone 15 Pro that were shooting basically prototypes of Apple Log. Apple Log was being developed on that set. That's how they tested it all out. Yeah, I got a tour of an F1 car at the Apple campus to show me how they were basically, that's when they built.
Did you make a video?
Features. They're like, well, no, I made some stories if you missed them on Instagram.
Dang.
Yeah, but it was really cool. I can say all of it in these few sentences. That's the thing. I didn't get there wasn't like a lot of deeper knowledge, beyond that. It was just that's how they stress tested all of this and made sure like this has to be ready for Hollywood. So there's one specific camera that would be mounted to the F1 car over the driver's shoulder was a iPhone 15 sensor that was being, there's no phone in there, but it was the sensor ripped out of the camera, feeding back wirelessly. And that's when they were developing what Apple Log would look like. And it just cuts into the movie and you don't notice. So, but I'm also like you in terms of family photos of like, I think it's worth bringing around the big cameras. So I actually those aren't the case. Those photos are almost important in a way to me that I want something better than the pro features on my phone. So that's what I like to bring out a big camera as well. I'm kind of the same way. There's still this, like you're emphasizing the pro-ness of, let's say, ProRes Apple Log. And I just totally agree with that if you're not going to spend time on it later, like if you're not going to be editing and color grading, I usually either I use the big camera or I just treat it more casually. And then I'm just shooting in default mode of my iPhone. When I use my iPhone in Apple Log, it's that I need control later. So it's client work or it's for, content that I'm going to spend some time on. So even though I love it so much, I think that we're like still missing a few hardware and software solutions from Apple that would allow me to shoot it all the time. And those are, like we said before, having a compressed format, H.265 or something That's what the default is for saving Apple Log videos. And we need a LUT preview built into the Photos app so that when you shoot an Apple Log, it looks normal. And I want to be able to like airdrop it to my friends and it still looks normal. You know, I don't want to have to treat it carefully. Or actually maybe the best example is when we shoot our travel content, like our Instagram reels, especially for Anya's page that are showing off the places we're traveling. We still shoot that in the regular profile. We don't use Apple Log, even though these are important videos. And it's because the videos get reused for like, they'll get posted as Instagram stories, they'll be posted around, and I don't have time to color grade them all every time they get posted. So I just want there to be a basic preview LUT that the system applies. And if I upload it to Instagram, it looks normal by default. You know, I don't need to work on it to have it viewable by other people. So once those two things are handled, which I'm hoping they'll be taken care of this year, and by the way, are handled in the Samsung Galaxy S26 Ultra that I just reviewed, which I haven't used in Android much for a while. But when you're using its log system, you can shoot in H.265 and it has a preview built in the default photo app. So that is a huge advantage.
Yeah, that'd be great to see that added. I mean, I guess Apple maybe thought that other apps would solve this problem, and they certainly do. You know, the Blackmagic camera app does. Of course, our friend developed Kino, which I believe some of your LUTs are even in there, right, Tyler?
Yeah, that's true.
And so there are plenty of tools out there that can help you. But like, I know it's weird, but like, I just prefer to use the real built-in tools. It's just so much easier.
I think some people might be screaming into their headphones right now that like, well, you can just use third-party apps. There's so many great third-party apps that do this. And there are, and I've made videos about them and I use them. And yeah, Kino is a great example of it. You can bake the LUTs in, so you don't need to apply them later. You can, I mean, you know, if you buy my LUT pack or whatever, you can just like import those and apply anything you want. It's not just the built-in ones into Kino, or Blackmagic also supports this. Most of them do. But those third-party camera apps aren't as great to use. They don't have as direct access to the camera API. So the stabilization isn't as good. That's the main thing that I miss. You don't have the smooth zooming in and out. You don't have as quick of response when you're changing lenses. There's just, it's not the developer's fault. They are working as hard as they can, but they don't have the same access as Apple does. So I end up using the default camera app quite often.
Yeah. So also with the introduction of the 17 Pro, we did get ProRes RAW 12-bit Apple Log 2. Can you just briefly talk on whether or not that's even necessary?
I wasn't even thinking about it. I completely forgot that happened. And this is a beyond pro feature. You know, there's levels of pro, like you and I are professionals. We get paid to do this work, but there is also Hollywood and their demands are very different. And that is the only group that really needs raw video. I think this goes for a lot of the professional cameras as well, that most of the time it makes so much more sense to be shooting in some kind of compressed format, which even includes ProRes. ProRes is compressed as well. It's just more than enough. RAW is way beyond. The challenge is that like
raw video.
The advantages of raw video are canceled out by the fact that the iPhone sensor is just too small to make an important difference. I think if you're working with an Alexa and you're doing some interesting post-production later, like maybe you do need access, or actually a better example would be a Red camera, because they really lean into their RAW support. Maybe it'll make sense to have RAW so you can make some edits later. But like the iPhone sensor just doesn't hold on to enough data to push the quality that much better. I just don't think you're anyone except the absolute highest of VFX artists and colorists are going to see a difference there.
Yeah, I would assume that, like you said, because they used iPhone sensors in the F1 film with Brad Pitt that was in theaters, you know, that's a real actual movie. I'm sure those filmmakers were pushing Apple to do this. And I guess once the tool is developed, they were like, well, let's just put it out there, you know, since we've already developed it. There. It's cool that it's there. And the fact that Apple is even dancing around Hollywood and like working with them. I mean, there's all sorts of different types of log flavors, if you will. Samsung has theirs, you know, Lumix, which we're shooting on, they have their own logs. But log is just that really flat profile that gives you essentially as much dynamic range as you can get in the image before you add color to it. But Apple is working directly with ACES, ACES, which stands for Academy Color Encoding System, which this is like very, very Hollywood level standards. And this is what all cinema cameras are based around, because it's standards that everybody kind of has agreed on. This is what we agree is how the color management should be handled, so that professional colorists who are working on this have just a standard that they're working with, and all the cameras use it. That way they can match their cameras between shots. Apple is working with ASUS to make sure that Apple Log is in that system. And I just think it's insane that they're working at that high of a scale. And it's really interesting. Like, what even is the purpose for this? Like, I guess marketing, but it's just very aspirational to be next to Hollywood. And I guess it's aspirational, and it sells iPhones to say this movie was shot on iPhones. So I guess that's the reason, is marketing reasons. But it is interesting because even like Lumix, like I don't think Lumix is working that hard to get their cameras on set. Like it's just interesting to see this.
Yeah, I've always assumed it's marketing, that like it's just so valuable to be able to say that it's, well, two things. It's marketing to say that they're using iPhones to make real movies, but also that Apple really does want to be able to use their phones for their own video production. And I think they demand these features of themselves. They know they need these features to continue pushing their own video production forward. So this is a dog fooding situation where they're like, well, we know what we need, so we're just going to push that to the limit so we can do absolutely everything that we want when we use our own cameras for our own video production. So I think that's a lot of the emphasis.
In fact, ever since the 15 Pro, I believe every single keynote has been filmed on iPhone, right?
Yeah, I think so. And then, we're seeing it push into Android as well. So I just, I'd reviewed the latest Galaxy phone somewhat recently, and I know they are trying to do the same thing. They're coming at it a little late. Apple's clearly way ahead of everybody, especially in terms of video. That's been their huge lead for a while now. But I don't want to count out that Samsung isn't also working with ACES. I don't know that, but I do know that like they're trying to hit those same standards. And when I was converting my iPhone LUTs to be able to work with Samsung, it wasn't difficult. They did kind of respond in somewhat similar ways. So, I think Apple has such a lead here. I don't think there will be a huge push from any of the other manufacturers to compete for this really high-end pro space, but it does, at least Samsung's trying. I don't know.
Yeah, they are trying. They're doing their best, and I know that it's important for them, but I just did a quick search on Google, and it does not seem that they've explicitly announced any type of partnership with ASUS, but they do have different logs and different formats. And I mean, competition is competition. They're going to try to compete.
It's doing like real log, not like you were talking about a minute ago with like Filmic Pro. Used to be kind of fake log. It is a proper log profile. But this is also something that I found Android was really pushing the iPhone on lately, was when I did my test of the recent Xiaomi phone, which again, I've been out of the Android space for a while, and suddenly I've tested a few in a row. And they are doing this Leica authentic look for photography. So maybe let's move into the photo modes on the iPhone a little in a second. And basically what it's doing is that the Xiaomi look is giving you a more traditional photographic response. So this is what you'd get out of a mirrorless camera. It's what you'd get out of even a film camera in a way. It's just like, it's not doing HDR, right? Like shadows are shadows and highlights are highlights. And it's not, when you see the image, it's not that it jumps out at you as like, wow, this is incredible. It's just like, oh, this doesn't look like a phone. This looks organic and natural. And it does that straight to shooting to a JPEG. You don't need to do a bunch of extra work. So as we lead into the ProRes section, I just want to highlight that I have realized that recently, like Android is starting to give us the photo response that we're looking for when we go into some of these more advanced methods like Apple ProRes. But let's go into that next. So the video stuff, I think that's where the biggest lead is for iPhone. ProRes, Apple Log, it's way ahead of everybody else. Now, ProRes and photography, it's very good. It's the market leader, but how often do we need it? Like when I don't think major photo shoots are necessary, like marketing campaigns aren't necessarily being shot using iPhone, but it does end up like becoming a stopgap all the time. Like, how have you seen the iPhone get used in professional context now that we have ProRes?
Well, I can really only speak to my professional use case, which is with thumbnail design and working with large creators like Curtis Connor, Drew Gooden. These are creators with over 5 million subscribers and, averaging between 5 to 10 million views per video. And I'm working with them, and they are competent shooters. Most YouTubers are just introverted filmmakers who found a niche that's doing well. So all of them actually are pretty competent shooters themselves, even though you wouldn't really think about it because they're entertainers mostly. But all of them that I've worked with know how to operate a camera. Most of them have Sony cameras. I'd say almost every YouTuber I've worked with is shooting on Sony. With the exception of Curtis, who still shoots on a GH5. So Curtis Connor has been one of my main clients for the last 3 years. And there were a couple of moments where I needed some assets for a thumbnail, and he wasn't in his normal set. He didn't have access to his camera. And so I said, "Do you have a Pro iPhone on you by chance?" And he said, "Yeah." I was like, "Cool, go stand next to a white wall, go into," I like screen recorded on my phone how to do it. Turn on this feature, shoot all of the assets of yourself with like a nice flat lighting in Pro RAW. And he was like, okay. And so he literally just iMessaged me those images, and I pulled them in, and man, it just changed everything. Going from standard iPhone pictures to Pro RAW, the same discussion that we were having about video earlier is true with Pro RAW. It removes that plastic, overprocessed, HDR, overly sharp look that you get with pretty much all mobile phone photography, and it just looks correct. It's just clean, it's sharp, but it's what I love about it is it isn't straight off of the sensor. Like Halide has this great feature now that I think they're calling natural processing or like natural shooting, which really is,
or there's Process Zero as well. I think that's their thing. But then Moment calls it natural. But yeah, there's a bunch of competing versions of this. Yeah.
And that's a very Gen Z, like make it look like a point and shoot camera kind of look, because it's literally just straight off the sensor raw with no processing whatsoever, as I would say in America, not processing, but yeah, processing. But the Pro RAW, which I love, is giving us the things that I do love about iPhone's computational photography, giving us, great noise reduction, adding more dynamic range. If you look at like Apple's little animations when they're describing this, it's like we're processing 17 images all together, skin tones, this, that, like it's doing all this and then blending into the image. I don't know exactly if it's 17 or 6, I don't know, but there's multiple layers happening that's then being blended together, but we still get white balance control, exposure control, the things that you're used to having with raw images. And I just love it. So I've started to talk to pretty much all of my clients and ask them to switch to this mode. And when I'm getting assets from people, I actually honestly prefer Pro RAW images because it's such a dummy-proof way of taking an image for somebody who doesn't really understand cameras. Like these guys are competent with cameras, but they're not photographers. So I would sometimes get a raw image that was like too dark or like overexposed in a weird way. And even though it was raw, it just wasn't ideal. Or even having to describe to them the difference between JPEG and RAW on a real camera is a little bit more complex. But just switching to Pro RAW and then taking a picture, it's just very simple, straightforward, and the results are incredible. So that's how I've used it professionally, and it's really changed my entire workflow. But I've also used it as just as a dad, as I wear my dad hat again. But I love using this mode for those reasons I just discussed, because it just looks like a real camera. But I don't even process it. I never even like edit it. It's just straight out of camera. It looks great. The colors look great. The dynamic range looks great. And it removes that iPhone look. And because these cameras now are like 45 megapixels, you can zoom in and it's just a nice sharp image. And then I've noticed even when I text that photo out to my friends and family, it converts it to a JPEG, but it applies the kind of lack of mobile cruft to that JPEG. So it's a less processed JPEG now as well. So it's kind of my default way of shooting things that are important to me that aren't even professional.
I think one of the best uses actually is that like everybody having it that you're describing in a similar way that, radio interviews, or like if you need to do, let's say, get audio interviews with somebody that is a non-professional, the best thing you can ask them to do is just hold their phone up like they're talking on the phone to their head and get them to record through the sound app and just talk to those microphones, and it's going to sound amazing. And in a similar way, it's like if you need to collect media from people that aren't professionals, a pro iPhone just has every single tool required that they can give you something that can be mixed into a professional shoot. It's usually not the best option, right? Like the sensor is still smaller, which has inherent weaknesses compared to larger traditional cameras, but it just can mix in with it with absolutely no problems at all. Like you say, the resolution is like real resolution. Like it is pretty sharp. The fact that it has some of that basic processing makes it look more beautiful. It stitches the images together, so you get the correct amount of dynamic range. A lot of the noise is removed. So that's why I think the one feature you're mentioning, like Process Zero, is not useful. Like I think it's a novelty. It's like fun. If you enjoy it, that's fine. But you're just throwing away information without any real advantage. But I do have some complaints about how ProRes is currently implemented, and it's basically that I still think you need to do some work to get the most out of it. And you can see this best if you take a ProRes photo, bring it into either Lightroom or Photoshop, and as you're editing the raw version of it, turn Apple Raw image profile, like at the very top of everything, it'll say like which picture profile you're using. Turn Apple Raw down to 0. And all of a sudden you'll see like what the real image is kind of hiding under the tone map. Sometimes it'll be underexposed. Sometimes it'll be exposed correctly. Like if it's under, basically they're tone mapping the shadows to come up a lot. But you'll see what the camera really exposed, and you'll get that more normal relationships between highlights and shadows. And there isn't really a way to get to that without going into a raw application. So like, yeah, you're talking about how a lot of the filtering is stripped away just by shooting raw. And I agree that it looks better, but there's like a whole nother step better that it can look. It's frustrating to me that there still is this extra step that like really has a visible benefit. I want to be able to switch to a mode that just gives me the finished image that looks like my regular camera does, and the thing is, I know it's there. I know the phone has that potential in it. And I kind of think this will be coming soon. Like we've had some hints that Apple is reassessing how they treat the pro features of the iPhone in the 18. I think there'll either be a new pro app or there'll be new pro features in the main camera. I don't know what they'll be, but this is what I hope they will be, is giving us that natural look without any third-party apps required.
So you discussed how you don't always shoot in log for your work with Anya for mobile stuff, for the reasons you listed. Do you find yourself switching to ProRes for photography for Anya for that type of stuff?
We use a big camera most of the time. Like the photo matters. I've usually got a big camera with me, and I end up using ProRes when if I don't have a big camera with me and this is a great photo. I know this is awesome. I want to have a good version of this. It's very quick to switch over to ProRes, and I'll just grab one that, has all the resolution and all the image quality there. Mm-hmm. But that's only if something really exceptional is happening. And still most of the photos on my phone are definitely taken with just the default HEVC format. Yeah. It's an amazing backup is how I think about it. It's like when you just have your phone, it can now mix in with everything else. But I still wouldn't usually choose it. You only have one focal length. It's a small lens. It's a small sensor. You can't get any depth of field. So,
and I would argue that if you're going to go to a pro camera for anything, photography makes the most sense, and you see the biggest upside, even with a older camera, to be honest. You could buy a camera that's honestly 15 years old. Buy an old 5D Mark IV or something with a 24 or 35 millimeter prime lens. You could probably get off of eBay, and you'll see still way more advancement. You'll see way more of an upgrade with your 5D Mark IV image. That's a very old camera at this point compared to even ProRes on an iPhone. Like there's still a huge gap between a pro stills camera. Let's just forget about video for a second and just like going photo. That's why I walk around with a dedicated photography tool like the OM3 for me. And that's why I think Fuji has just been so successful with the X100 line. That's why Leica's Q line has been very successful. The Ryko GRs, these kind of little side, almost fashionable side cameras. Even though most people that have the nice little side camera have a pro phone in their pocket, they're still choosing to pick up that dedicated photography tool. And it's really a big difference.
It's just fun.
Yeah, it is fun.
It's just a good time. I think a lot of people buy them because it's just like, it's enjoyable to have this extra piece of hardware. It's why we like cameras in the first place, I think.
Well, I think the knobs, the control, being able to obviously change lenses is a big one. And the EVF is like really one of the biggest differences for me. I don't find myself using an EVF very often for shooting video, but when I'm taking stills, I really greatly prefer taking pictures through the EVF. It just feels much more intentional. It feels like you're really a part of the process. And, it really allows you to be fully immersed in the composition, in the photo before you hit that trigger to take the image. So, and it's a very intentional, purposeful thing. Like if you're in a crowd or you're with your friends and family, you pull the camera up to your eye. It's very intentionally, okay, this person is taking a picture. Let's all smile or not or whatever. Whereas on a phone, is he just checking Twitter right now? Like what is, what's going on? Like holding it up, kind of like doing this. I mean, obviously we're all used to now, hey, everybody get together, let's take a picture. Like everybody's used to that obviously too with a phone, but it just feels so much more intentional socially to use a real camera.
Well, hopefully people keep buying real cameras long enough for us to have more cameras to review in the future. But I also want iPhone to implement every single pro feature that I've ever looked for so that it can take care of my needs when I don't have that bigger camera. If you want more of this, check us out on all the social platforms at Full Stack Creator Show. And if you want to learn how to make thumbnails that get clicks, check out David's thumbnailacademy.com. Or if you want beautiful LUTs and Lightroom presets for your photos and videos, head to stallman.com/shop.